Now, welcome along. So we are talking about the World Championships in Tokyo. You won't be shocked to hear because we had flagged on Thursday when we spoke to Cathal Dennehy, who's with us again today, that Saturday lunchtime could be eventful from an Irish point of view in a very good way. And it delivered. So Kate O'Connor produced personal best after personal best to take silver in the heptathlon. She is the first Irish woman to medal at a major championship in a multidiscipline sport ever, full stop. And for Ireland, we haven't generally lit up World Championships since their inception about 50 years ago. It's the first medal at the Worlds since Rob Heffernan 12 years ago. So Kate O'Connor delivered in spades with an injury. Phenomenal performance in an event we're not that au fait with in many ways. And then probably a little bit forgotten, overshadowed and completely wrongly, Keenan McFillips ran one of the fastest times in history to finish fourth in the world at the in the 800 metre final. And he was behind three of the quote-unquote all-time greats in the category. So from injury and not really doing it at this level in a big way to fourth in the world at 23 years of age, there is now huge excitement about what's possible for him all of a sudden. So let's get into it. Cathal will join us in just a second, but here is a reminder of Kate O'Connor coming home in the final event of the heptathlon, the 800 metres, injured but looking good for silver. Greg Allen of RTE.
The silver medal is around 100 metres away from Kate O'Connor right now. It hurts, but she's giving it everything. The knee hurts, I'm sure, and there's a slight element, maybe even of a slight limp, maybe not, but certainly Kate O'Connor is doing all she needs to do here. Kate O'Connor is the World Championship silver medalist. What a thing to be able to say. Oh, injury or not, she ran a really, really strong race. Not far off her best. And considering the effort that she's put in over these 7 events, including a best in the javelin off a Bockety knee, and there she is in the 800 metres, just doing all she has to keep track of Katarina Johnson-Thompson. The gap had to be 11 seconds. It is only a matter of a few seconds. And Kate O'Connor is the silver medalist. And it's a personal best. Well, would you believe it?
What was all this worry about?
5 personal bests out of 7 events. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, not bad. Cathal Dennehy still in Tokyo. Hey, Cathal.
How are you, Joe?
Very well. It is the power of major championships, these national moments, that we kind of have 2 household names overnight, really.
Yeah, I mean, Kate's ascension, I suppose, was a lot steadier. She was at the Worlds 2 years ago, finished 13th, I think, there. Won a European under-20 medal, first ever international multi-events medal for Ireland in 2019. But obviously, they're kind of off-Broadway performances, really, when it comes to something like this. And yeah, just the year of years this year, bronze at the European Indoors. If you win a European multi-events medal, that kind of automatically makes you good enough to win a global multi-events medal, because the vast majority of world-class multi-eventers are European. Won world silver at the World Indoors, and of course gold at the World University Games. Still, she'd been coming in probably number 6. I think the bookies had her about 5-1 to win a medal, I think, which is about fair, really, given the caliber of opponent that was in there. You Olympic world champion Nafi Thiam and Katarina Johnson-Thompson both in there against her. She beat both of them. Obviously Thiam didn't finish. And yeah, just a performance of her life in a year where she's continually produced the performances of her life. It kept happening through the year. She did it in Tallinn indoors, and then she did it in Appledorn, broke a load of personal bests. Then she went on to the World Indoors, broke another load of personal bests, and it's continued outdoors, which is a lot easier to do earlier on in the year. To do it when you've already set those marks really high becomes a lot harder. And I think she was probably even a bit surprised that she got 5 out of 7 personal bests. But yeah, she has just proven herself time and time again an absolutely clutch performer, which is exactly the ingredient you want in addition to her obvious talent.
Yeah, so the American Anna Hall took the title with 6,881 points. Then it's O'Connor, 167 points back, and bronze was shared 133 points back of O'Connor. Are margins like 167, 133, are they razor thin, or is that a healthy lead? I'm getting to grips with the intricacies of heptathlon, if that's okay.
Yeah, well, I think everyone is, and me included, on that front, because Ireland has never had this before, but we certainly will for the next few years. But yeah, no, 100 points is a good lead at that decathlon at that point. You know, you're talking about a 7, 8 second advantage when it comes down to that deciding 800 meters. So pretty much a lot of times they can jog around in the 800 if they want to, if you build up a lead like that. But again, I suppose when you're down around the 6,000 points, 6,200, it is, but then, or it isn't so much a big lead. But when you get up to like where Kate O'Connor has now entered, 6,700, 6,800, you know, every 20, 30 points really is crucial. And even in terms of her long jump, I think she added 5 centimeters to her long jump in the third attempt over the second attempt. That was worth like 15 points. So, you know, those tiny centimeters you're eking out, they all convert to ultimately time in the 800 meters, which obviously decides it all.
I heard you flagging her before the championship, given the year she'd had, that there was a possibility of a medal here. And she said herself she'd never come to a championship with so much expectation. She said pressure on my shoulders, both internal and external. So to have the 5 personal bests in 7 events with that pressure is remarkable. And we got a good indication Friday that she was in great form. Personal best in the 100 metres hurdles, the high jump, and the 200 metres. And then that took us to Saturday. And you mentioned the long jump, not typically one of her strongest events, but she produced a best leap of 6.22. She sustained the knee injury during the long jump, and then I guess after treatment, and also, as we'll hear here in a second, playing around with her technique a bit, she came out with that injury and had to throw a javelin, which is, you know, that's putting a lot of force through knees, the speed and then the stopping and all the different things that go on there. So this was you speaking to her in the mix zone afterwards. And so you talked about that Saturday morning. You do the long jump, you injure your knee, you have to come out and throw a javelin. So you asked her, how bad was it? What do you do between the two events?
It wasn't great, to be honest. Like, after the long jump I hobbled away, and I was trying not to, like, obviously make a big deal about it, and then before the javelin, we did very, very little. It was more just like, get it taped up and let's see if we can run, let's see if we can run sideways. And then the next problem was when I released, how I was going to block, because you throw and then you block with your right, and I can't slow down on this leg. So it was just kind of like, we were trying to change technique a little bit and like quickly land onto the right and then hop onto the left. And yeah, I think that, like, Dave filled me with a lot of confidence beforehand. He told me, like, what we've been doing in training. I know what I've been doing in training. I think it's an even bigger throw out in me. That's kind of why I did a second throw. The plan was to kind of just do one and be done, but he believed that I could get further, and it just wasn't there today, just with the cards that I was dealt with. But yeah, it fills me with a lot of excitement that I know that there's even more there, and that I can pull it out whenever it needs to be pulled out, even when things aren't going 100% my way.
And finally, how are you going to celebrate?
Probably drink that Pepsi, and I don't know, just go back and just chill out. I barely slept last night, so just sleep. I'm a bit boring, but we're staying out here in Tokyo for a week and a half with some of the rest of the team, so I'm sure we'll do a wee bit of partying.
Thanks very much.
So pretty impressive, you know, to change your technique going to injury kind of mid-tournament. This is Karate Kid style.
Yeah, and as she mentioned, struggling up and down the stairs. I'm sure there was serious panic when that struck, but luckily it happened with only 2 events to go and not 4 or 5 events to go. But yeah, and perhaps even if it was the other knee, it could have been even worse in the javelin, you know, the planting knee. But she got through it, and, you know, I think word was starting to filter out only minutes before the 800 meters about that knee issue. That she'd been struggling with really for the afternoon. But as I said, I think she could have had a dislocated knee and she would have run through it on that 800 meters. So she had enough of a buffer built up. And to perform like she did in the javelin, though, another personal best, was just remarkable. And that had been annoying the hell out of her, that personal best, because that went back 6 years to her, the day she won the European under-20 medal, and she'd been working and trying to get it, and to break new ground, you know, with a 53-meter throw. And it was funny, just being in the stadium, you know, the crowd are watching it, 50, 60,000 people, and they're watching these kind of 40-meter efforts, you know, 35-meter efforts, 45-meter efforts. And then when Kate threw 53, it just stood out so much amongst so many of the heptathletes that there was a big gasp from the crowd. But that is very much her 40. And once she'd unleashed that, I mean, she only probably needed a 50-meter throw and the silver was going to be safe. But to produce her best ever in that moment with that issue going on and all the pressure that was on her, again, just she comes up clutch when you think so many athletes would falter.
Yeah. And then knocks a second off her PB in the 800 meters. Just round it off. Like it's just remarkable. We obviously don't have a great tradition in multidiscipline sports. So I was reading Tom Kiley back in 1904 representing Great Britain and Ireland is the other medalist in multidiscipline sports. Why is that, and how did she manage to conjure all this up?
I'd say facilities and coaching are two of the big ones. Historically, I think Ireland did not have the facilities, going back to the sort of 60s, 70s, 80s. And then I think coaching probably more recently. I don't think Ireland's facilities are especially bad these days. They could certainly be better, but you do need a lot of access to a lot of good facilities. So if you're based in a town around the country, basically if you're based outside Dublin, even if you are based in Dublin, you're going to have huge problems training for a high level multi-event competition. But I would say coaching is probably a big one as well. You need expertise across a range of event groups, and on this front, you have to just absolutely doff your cap to Michael O'Connor, Kate's dad, because he brought her up. He, didn't have the knowledge in a lot of these areas, but they sent her over to university in Sheffield, trained with a lot of the best British multi-eventers, came home before the pandemic, ended up continuing that study just remotely, and he built, a family-run high-performance unit, basically. They got one of the best throws coach in Ireland in Dave Sweeney. Tom Reynolds up in Belfast does her hurdles. And they're always dipping into expertise, whether it be Sarah Lavin and Noel Marcy with hurdling work, or Coach Phelan Kelly. I know the middle distance coach, they were asking him about 800 workouts. They're just approaching the kind of best coaches who are out there in various disciplines. And the result is what we're seeing. It is so impressive to have kind of built their own little high performance system and within Ireland and taken her to the top of the world.
It's an audacious thing to take on, because I think most dads, if your daughter's shown a bit of talent in a few things, you say, well, pick one and we'll really hone down into that and see where we can go. So he obviously, well, like, who drove it? Whose idea was, how about we do all 7? I mean, do we know where that comes from?
Kind of came from Kate winning a lot of medals in the likes of high jump, long jump, hurdles through the schools. But a lot of multi-eventers, a lot of them now could be individual medalists and have won individual medals across event disciplines. But Kate is that kind of all-rounded athlete that I think it's highly unlikely Kate would really make an impact internationally in any one single event. So what you're looking at, it's like the triathlon, in terms of someone who's not going to win a medal in cycling, swimming, or rowing, but you just have this ridiculous all-round ability, kind of like a master of all trades. And that really is what she is, to think you can throw a 53-meter javelin and run a 208 800 and jump over 6 meters in the long jump, and still run, what is it, 13 something in the hurdles. It's just a kind of a balance and a variety of athletic abilities that is so rare, and it's so impressive to watch.
Okay.
And I think really where it came from was about the age of 16. She kind of realized, I'm not absolutely outstanding at any one of these events the way, so many of her peers are, but I'm just really, really good at lots of events. So it kind of made sense. She went to, youth games under 18s and then won that Euro under 20 medal. And like I said, once you win a Euro under 20 medal in the heptathlon, it kind of automatically indicates that you have the potential to win a global medal as a senior, just because of how cutthroat the competition is. And they have managed that transition beautifully over the last 6 years or so.
Yeah, clearly. And in elite multidiscipline events, would the majority of participants be heavily reliant on their 1, 2, 3 that they're outstanding in and be quite weak in the others? Like, is Kate unusual to be such a strong all-rounder?
Yeah, I think she's kind of, her peak isn't as high as the others, but her base doesn't go as low as the others. Like, you look at Katrina Johnson-Thompson, who's just, outstanding in things like the long jump and high jump, and a really good sprinter, but she's, she's a very bad javelin thrower, and that's been her downfall at so many championships. And so, yeah, Kate is just that brilliant all-rounder, and she has plenty room for improvement as well. That 53-meter javelin, as I said, she was throwing pretty much 53 meters as a junior, 18 years old. There's no way that's the limit of her potential. Her shot put can definitely get better. She had a lot of issues with that coming in. And I think, her long jump clearly as well can get better. So I think there's definitely at least another 100 points there. And, if Kate O'Connor can become a 6,800 point heptathlete, I'd say at 95% of the global championships, world or Olympics, that will get her on the podium if she can do it when it matters in the next 7 to 10 years.
It's so exciting. Because I guess like a lot of people watching it over Friday and Saturday, it's hard not to be blown away by what it takes to throw the javelin 53 meters, to do 800 meters in 2:08, to jump 6 meters, then the long jump. For one person to achieve the mastery in all these different disciplines. And I was kind of thinking to myself, like, they should be the most celebrated athletes in some ways. They should be the most high profile, the most famous, as opposed to the 100 meters champion or the 200 meters. The sprinters tend to kind of be the rock stars. Like, I was kind of thinking of the multidiscipline superstars. It's my ignorance possibly, but I think most people would be like, well, Bruce, now Caitlyn Jenner, in that's going back to 1976 in Montreal, and probably Daley Thompson, a lot of people would mention. So they're such phenomenal athletes, but they're a little bit off Broadway.
Yeah, and I think there is a layer of complexity to the multi-events, and just in terms of, as a lot of Irish people learned the last few days, to follow it is complex and to understand it, and then just to be always doing the sums. And
it's not sexy. No one needs maths.
No, and it's no secret that in a nerdy sport, the biggest nerds are the most interested in the multi events. Okay. So it is, and I think just the 1500 and the 100, it's all just so simple. It can be so immediately understood by any general sports fan, whereas there is that kind of just access barrier when it comes to the multis, that you just do have to invest in it. And as I think people learn too, once you do invest in it, it can be phenomenally entertaining, and you just look up to their range of athletic abilities with nothing but admiration. When you see an athlete like Nafi Thiam or Jessica Ennis-Hill as well, years ago, obviously lit up the London Olympics, and ran a 12.5 in the hurdles to start her heptathlon at the London Olympics, you just stand back and go, wow, they are, they rightfully lay claim to being called the world's greatest athletes.
Yeah. And this is possibly gross generalization, but you said it's a very European-centric event. In Africa, is that an issue with facilities? Like in Kenya, they're just not able to...
Hugely.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, hugely. It is something like, I'd say it's kind of like rowing or other things. It's not that you can't, it's just that you need an access to facilities. So yeah, there's very few world-class, heptathletes, decathletes who come out of, say, South America or Africa or, lots of Asia. It is heavily dominated. I'd say 80% of the, the top 10 in the world in the multi-events are typically European, and then there's normally a few Americans, and there's the odd exception, but yeah, that's the way it is, unfortunately. And there's other events in athletics that are like that as well. And it's no slight on them, but it is a reality of the event that you need a certain access and certain funding and facilities and a level of coaching to make the top in those events.
Let's talk Keenan McFillips, because he really should not be forgotten. He should be so celebrated. Just 23 years of age, from Longford. We talked to you on Thursday after he'd won a semi-final. Unfortunately for him, the lane draw went on world rankings as opposed to who won heats, and so he was in lane 2, which is not the greatest of draws. Like, where do you start here in trying to contextualise why this was so brilliant? Obviously, he broke his own record and the national record again, so twice in 48 hours. He finished 4th in a field where, he said himself, it's basically an Olympic final, and the 3 who finished ahead of him are somewhere in the all-time greats kind of category. So to finish 4th here, it's such a great achievement. I mean, it's he has won 4th. He's not missed out on a medal despite our instincts.
Yeah, I agree. And I think when you look at that race and you watch it back, there are tiny things you could point to maybe that would get him closer, but I don't see how you could watch that race and say anything other than the 3 best athletes on the day walked away with the 3 medals. Because, Emmanuel Wanyonyi is obviously the king of the 800 meters the last few years, and he went through the first 200 meters in 23 seconds. That's just lightning quick. And Cian McPhillips is a kind of an endurance-based 800 meter runner. He's European under 20 champion, of course, at 1500 meters. He grew up primarily running 1500 meters. And a lot of the other guys kind of are more 400, 800. And I suppose the significance of that is that if you're a kind of an endurance type in the 800 and you go out super hard with a 23-second first 200, you're basically just putting a phenomenal amount of lactic acid in your legs and you're kind of redlining too early. Whereas the more endurance kind of based guys kind of have to run a bit of a steadier pace. And it's the same at the 1500. Like Jakob Ingebrigtsen can't rip through the first lap because he's more of an endurance style athlete. So Keenan McFillips said that himself, that would have been just a little bit too risky and it probably would have backfired badly if he'd tried to hammer out of that lane 2 and get up into the top 3 after 200. So he ran, as the race played out, he ran the best race he could. I mean, I think he said there's one moment he might look back on and it's maybe the point from kind of 500 into the race to 600 down that back straight on the second lap. I think he just hesitated a little. He didn't press on. And he, again, I think that was just a little bit of fear, maybe just a little bit of having never run this pace before in his life and maybe not fully believing in his ability to the full extent. But again, if you push on at that part of the race, if you push from 300 out rather than 250 or 200 out, then maybe you blow up the last 50. It's such a fine art and a balance to strike. As it was, he basically had to circle the whole field. He went from 8th up to 4th. He was getting there, but let's not get into this. If the track was 410 meters or whatever, he would have had a bronze. Everyone knew where the finish line is. The 3 best guys on the day got there. He ran by far the best race of his life. It's the 16th fastest time in history at 800 meters. He did it having already produced the 2 best performances of his life. It was just outstanding stuff, and it probably didn't get the reward maybe he deserved, but as I said, the 3 best athletes won it, and there is a question mark here, I would say, as well, in terms of the future of this, and nothing has been proven, but like French police during the Paris Olympics raided the apartment of Jamel Sajati from Algeria and his coach. Nothing was found, nothing was proven, but L'Equipe had a story about that last year, but there must have been some reason they decided to raid an apartment in the athletes' village, and Sajati, who's never tested positive, just said that was nothing, basically, ahead of the Paris Olympics. But a 4th place finish is always annoying, but when there is a story like that in the midst, and I think, even talking about it or writing about it the weekend, we've highlighted things like that before in Ireland, and sometimes people will accuse you of sour grapes for even mentioning something like that, but I think it is also a relevant story that Sajati was running under a cloud in Paris last year that, as far as we can tell, has been lifted since, but it is there nonetheless.
Okay. Where did Sajati finish? 2nd, 3rd?
Sajati was 2nd, just a few hundredths of a second behind the win.
Okay. Well, it's not sour grapes. I mean, that's all factual. So we'll see. The way you talk about the tactics there is so interesting. Like the clock, the 42.15, before this year, his fastest time goes back to 2023 and it's a 1:45.92. So now he's knocking out 1.42.15, so the race of his life in many ways. So the clock says he ran an extraordinary race and couldn't have done any better. And yet, the eye test, everyone at home, guaranteed everyone at home said, he left himself too much to do because the kick was so strong. I did watch the interview you did with him afterwards, and it is that thing. He said, "Look, if I had gone with them, I don't think I could have got home in the same way. I just don't think I could have. Especially that first 300 meters where the pace is blistering. Like such composure in the biggest race of your life in a final. The whole country is watching. For you to have the discipline to say, ugh." It's very tempting to just keep pace a little bit more here, but I don't think it's the right thing to do, so I'm not going to. And then that part you talk about, the 500-600 meter stage, I guess, that's experience. It's the fastest race he's ever run in. He does not know. He does not know, if I go now that this bit harder and try to leave myself a little bit less to do, will I blow up on the final 100 meters? And there's no way of knowing. And he could have taken a gamble. Discretion, the better part of valor. You have to admire the discipline too and the composure.
Yeah, and I think there was another decision made down the back straight as well, which was not to go up the inside. He decided to come wide and go around the whole field, and you're running in lane 2. That's costing you a meter or 2. Again, it was only 2 meters that he's off a medal. But again, that's the kind of safer bet, is to go wide. You know you're going to have clear road. It's costing you ground, it's costing you time, but he could have gone up the inside around that last bend. We've seen Mark English do that, but Mark English is kind of the master of that, and the experience tells. And even you're following different athletes and you're choosing which one is dying, which one is going strong, in terms of who you're getting behind. We couldn't expect Cian McPhillips to do that. And the problem is, when you do that, maybe 50% of the time the gap opens and you look like a genius, and 50% of the time the gap does not open. And we saw that in the 1500 meters. I mean, Cole Hocker, who was the Olympic champion in the semi-final, he took the brave man's route up the inside, was waiting for a gap. It never opened, so he tried to force a gap and got disqualified. So, it's half a dozen of one and six of the other, I suppose. It's like, you never know. He could have gone up the inside, he could have got trapped, or maybe that gap would have opened and he'd be a medalist now. We will never know, but in the moment he made the decision to go wide. Ultimately, he didn't get there, but it remains by far the best race of his life. And to be honest, it remains one of the best Irish athletics performances this century, which is ironic given it hasn't got a medal, because inherently it's better than many, many of the performances that have actually got a medal.
Yeah, it's the cruel aspect. In terms of future expectations, so he's only 23. So you think, oh my goodness, the future is so bright, and it is. But it is worth stating, Wanyoni, for instance, the winner, is only 21. So he's just operating with freaks.
Yeah. 800-meter runners do peak a little bit earlier than, say, the further up the distances you go, the later they peak, I suppose. But yeah, I mean, Keenan McFillips has basically not had a clean run at it until this year. It's the first, year of where he's been training consistently, and he hasn't even been training consistently after I say that, because he did miss 11 weeks training in the spring. But I think in a way that helped him, because he built up this huge endurance base, cross training on an elliptical and an assault bike 3 hours a day, in addition to all his other strength and rehab work. And that has just built up a fantastic base layer of fitness, and he's much more sturdy now. And you can even see that the way he runs the last 100, the vast work he's done with Martina McCarthy at the Sport Ireland Institute has paid off in dividends, and he just looks a lot more robust now. And he's going to have every shoe brand throwing six-figure sums at him now to try and get him on a contract, because if you're looking ahead to the LA Olympics, I mean, there's a few there obviously, but with his age profile and his progression, he's the man the shoe companies are going to want to be betting on and having him in their kit. So he's going to have his choice of Diamond League races on the circuit, and he'll have a good hefty contract coming his way. So for the next few years, with that performance alone, he's very much sorted himself.
Yeah, you could see that base of fitness. I mean, he didn't lose his form really at all in that last 100 metres, which was super impressive. On decisions he may have to make, so shoe brands, give me your best offer. That's a nice decision. In terms of where he bases himself or how he spends the majority of his time, I don't know to what extent this performance changes things. He is very much Irish based. We talked to you on Thursday, and interestingly, one of the reasons maybe he hadn't been, supernova over the last couple of years is in part because his studies at UCD are very impressive and demanding. So he is hitting the books very, very hard. He's studying maths, but it's more complicated than just that. Because he said himself, some people give out, they say you can't really do it in Ireland, or maybe the environment isn't here. But I have not had that experience. I have a fantastic team around me, and talking about his coach, Joe Ryan, and family and friends. So very, very happy at UCD. I don't know where he is in his studies. Like, is there is it implied now that you go, quote unquote, professional? And how does that work in athletics? Like, do the shoe company say, we'll give you 200 grand a year and you base yourself at our centre where we have all our athletes? He'll get carded now, I presume, to a very reasonable extent by the Irish government. I don't fully understand professionalism in athletics.
Yeah, it is a complicated system, and it's changed over the years. And I suppose people would have been wondering, why is it such a big story when Rashida Adeleke went pro? And essentially at the time it meant you kind of surrendered your eligibility for the NCAA competition. Now, since they brought in NIL deals over there, name, image and likeness, so college athletes can earn money from professional sponsors while still staying in college. So for Keenan McFillips, basically, he will be a professional athlete in terms of, immediately he'll be paid a big sum over the next year by a shoe brand to compete, but he's planning to stay in college very much. And you can still, if he wants to, he can run the Irish InterVarsity Championships next April, but I suspect he won't for UCD.
Well, that just wouldn't be fair.
He has. So thankfully, he switched course. He was studying theoretical physics, which was the one that was really, really difficult and he found hard to juggle. And he's now studying financial maths, but he spaced it out. UCD said it'd been very good to him. I don't think he's doing that full time. And he said, even though he's 23 now, he's got 2 years left on that. His coach, Joe Ryan from Mullingar Harriers, is up. He's going to actually coach up in DCU, I believe now, the head job up there. And so like his coach is also in Dublin. He's all the supports he needs at the Sport Ireland Institute. And he'll have a manager getting him into whatever diamond leagues he wants, basically on the circuit next year, following that performance and that time. So yeah, life will look very different for Keenan McFillips going forward after this. And I think even socially, life will feel very different because, you know, as Kate O'Connor, as I mentioned, had that gradual ascent across the year and probably had a bit of time to adjust to people knowing who she was and more people recognizing her in restaurants and cafes. Keenan McFillips went there essentially completely unknown and now is suddenly going to be turning heads in the street. And he's a quiet guy. I'm sure he'll have no interest in the kind of celebrity life and things like that. But yeah, I think it's still going to be a shock to the system. But if you could pick someone who's going to be staying grounded, it would be him.
Yeah, I got Paul O'Donovan vibes, to be honest. I think that'll be his route.
Yeah.
So European Championships as well in Birmingham next August. You mentioned we've mentioned the shoe a few times, and you'll have a shoe sponsor. Obviously, in the last, it's probably coming up in a decade now, but times have been thrown a little bit into flux by the advances in shoe technology. Where are we in that cycle? Like when you say, for instance, McPhillips has run the 16th fastest time in history. We obviously all the time have better training and better diet and better sports science. And that, you know, times have always progressed through history and probably will continue to do so. So that's one aspect. But obviously things really accelerated over the last while. Where are we in that cycle now? Are like after a race on Saturday, that 800 meters where the times are all off the charts, I think for the first time ever, all 8 broke the 143 barrier. I had it written down anyway, but it was kind of the general standard was nuts. To what extent are you saying the shoe, or to what extent now are you saying this is just kind of this is very impressive by the standards of the last decade?
Yeah, I think there's two big factors here, I'd say, in the 800. One is the shoes. Now, I think as you go down the distances, the shoes become far less of a factor. So at 10K, they're massive. On the roads, they're absolutely massive. At the 100 meters, they're barely making a dent. Maybe they give you a tenth of a second or 7 or 8 hundredths of a second in 100 meters. In the 800, I would suspect the shoes probably give you maybe about half a second. It's not massively substantial. But the other thing that's made a difference in recent years is bicarb, sodium bicarbonate, otherwise known as baking soda. And again, you could always say drugs could be an issue in athletics, but like I think the athletics integrity unit with the procedures right now have never been stricter. And I don't think
drugs have always been part of the story. So it's, it's not like, they might be taking drugs for the first time. I mean, that's always been there.
Yeah, exactly. But something I'd say you could say across the board that I think has made a noticeable difference in especially the 800 meters is bicarb, because just talking to athletes and coaches, I would say at least 90% of elite 800 meter runners now, about an hour and a half, 2 hours before the race, they mix sodium bicarbonate into this hydrogel. It's the leader in this area is Morton, a Swedish manufacturer that is now essentially bicarb. The benefits of that have been known at events like the 800 or 400, these events that create huge levels of acidosis in the system. It acts as a kind of a buffer against that. And it's been known since the 80s. People used to take it back then, but essentially the reason so many couldn't or wouldn't is that it so often caused explosive diarrhea, either before or after the race. So that was happening probably to about half of athletes. So many athletes would not go anywhere near it. But Morton developed this hydrogel technology that allows it to pass through the stomach. And I think it's somewhere in the intestines, it gets absorbed before it gets broken down. And then the bicarb gets absorbed into the system without the gastrointestinal distress. And I think that's like less than 10% of athletes now have that. So that's why the vast majority of athletes, and when you talk to 800 meter athletes, they will say like if they do a session with bicarb or without it, they can feel the difference in terms of that, burning muscle feeling that they would feel on that second lap. And that is been proven to really make a difference. And I do think that is the reason, and that's only happened in the last 2 to 3 years, but I do think it's a big reason we've seen the times drop substantially in that time.
Okay, fascinating. And there's nobody saying, "Oh, this is kind of crossing a line." I mean, it's a natural substance.
Yeah, exactly. It is in foods and stuff. So I say it's quite similar to caffeine.
Mm.
But again, the vast majority of athletes would take caffeine as well. Distance runners take caffeine because it lowers the perception of fatigue, and sprinters take it to improve their reaction times. And no different than the All Ireland hurlers and footballers as well take it for that reason
Yeah.
before a game.
Um, just to mention then more broadly, it had sort of felt, because we are kind of medal focused and final focused, and it's all it's so superficial in many ways. It had felt like a low key ish world athletics until it kind of burst to life late last week and over the weekend. But you pointed out, I just saw in your Twitter feed, it's worth stating, at the World Championships in 2017 in London, which is not long ago, obviously, Ireland had one top 12 finish, and in Tokyo they have now had 7. And obviously then in terms of medals, Ireland had gone 18 straight major outdoor championships since 2000 without a medal in a track or field discipline. So that general sense of improvement sort of across the board with Irish athletics, as opposed to Sonia O'Sullivan kind of carrying the mantle, this would copper fasten that. One top 12 finish in 2017, in Tokyo 7. What are we putting this down to? Because like quite often when athletics is talked about in this country, facilities a bit meh and coaching seems to be a big problem. But obviously it's not dire.
No, it's not. I don't think facilities are that big a problem when you look at what Ireland has versus the global scale. I think there's various factors at play here. And it's important, I think, to credit each of I suppose, the bodies and the groups that have led to it. Participation is one. Athletics Ireland has record membership now. In terms of the last 5 years, there's a lot more kids doing athletics. The wider the base, the higher the peak. Generally, it's a good thing. You're catching a lot more talent. I think the way the talent is brought up now, the pathways from a talented 15-year-old to bring them up to be 22 and kind of the Cian McPhillips, the Kate O'Connors, that's a lot better. They're kind of monitored a lot better.
Right.
Athletics Ireland have done great work in upskilling the average club coach across the country. That's a lot of training courses, a lot of level 2s and level 3 coaching courses, whereby 20 years ago, your average club coach didn't have access to that information. Now it's very easy to learn how to coach a kid properly if you find an untalented or a talented one. Sport Ireland have done very good work in terms of like the institute. Every athlete I talk to about the Sport Ireland Institute, whether it's nutrition, strength and conditioning, physiotherapy, medical, psychology, they're all just have great things to say about how good and professional that service is. But I think I would say if there's an impact maker on all of this, and it's the biggest impact maker of all, it's the web of volunteer coaches across the country who are giving up their time, giving up their energy, they're turning down. And then when you talk about the people who are doing it to a really elite world-class level, they're generally not getting paid. They might get 5 grand or 10 grand off Athletics Ireland and Sport Ireland. It's kind of a laughable donation of money given the number of hours they're putting in and given the way they're coaching, or I suppose the standard to which they're coaching. And I think they are the people who are out there with the shovel making the biggest difference. And ironically, in a way, they're the people who are kind of rewarded the least, other than Cross Irish Society giving them a giant pat in the back. Now, that's got a lot better. Now the likes of Kate's coach or Keenan McFillips' coach, they get to come to a championships. 10 years ago, they would have had to pay their own way to a championship, buy hotel, buy their own flights. Now they're part of the team. That's big. They're going to the training camp. Paul McNamara, the head of high performance director of Athletics Ireland, has been helping them out. So there are a lot of ways it's better, better supported. But I suppose when you compare Ireland to how it is in the Netherlands or France or Germany, other countries that invest in a serious way in coaching, the situation is actually quite similar to how it is in football, where all these academies are professionally run, versus in Ireland, it's still seen primarily as something you do as a volunteer, whereas no one has a problem paying a tennis coach or a golf coach or a piano coach for a lesson, whereas in Ireland, the expectation is you're supposed to do it for free. And I think if we corrected that, and I think it is slowly being corrected, but if we corrected it in a big way, we would see a lot more moments like we saw last weekend happening on the global stage.
Okay, brilliant. Very last one. COVID sort of robbed Tokyo in 21 of much of the excitement. It looked like a great event through the TV, like amazing stadium, big buzz there. So overdue, it got its championships.
Yeah, I mean, it was just sad being at the Tokyo Olympics so often and seeing these beautiful stadiums. And, you know, life was kind of carrying on as normal, really, in Tokyo during that time. You know, I was walking past a concert with 3,000 people at it and no social distancing. And yet you'd go into a stadium watching the best athletes in the world, and the locals would be queuing up outside to take pictures with the Olympic rings. And, you know, they were partly state funded as well. So their taxpayer money was paying for those Olympics and they couldn't even get to go into them. So that was really sad, but this was a brilliant reward. And I'm so glad that World Athletics brought the event back, because it was a great gift back to the people of Japan who had put on the Olympics under such difficult circumstances. And, you know, I was saying to a friend last night that I think every second World Championships at least should be in Europe, because that's where the beating heart of the sport is guarantee of full stadiums. And sometimes when they've taken it to places like Doha, they've taken it to places like Oregon, it's backfired with terrible logistics and just half empty stadiums. It's a bad look for the sport, and it hurts the sport going to places like that. Whereas Tokyo is certainly one of those places outside of Europe where I would love to see the championships continually go back to, because this is their second time hosting it. Brilliant job both times. So if it was 10 or 15 years down the line, I would say absolutely go back to Tokyo and the people of Japan, because they've showed that they've done it brilliantly.
Brilliant. Listen, thank you so much. I know you're going to enjoy a couple of days around Tokyo, so well deserved. Cathal Dennehy, appreciate it, man. Thanks so much.
Cheers, Joe.